Federation, Cosatu, now, ahead of the Minister Zulu's briefing about their concerns and what they would expect the Minister to actually say. And I'm joined by Sizwe Pamla, who speaks on behalf of the Trade Union Federation. Mr. Pamla, good afternoon. Thank you very much. Welcome to the Midday View on eNCA. The President announced the extension up to March next year of that COVID relief, that extra relief grant, stress relief grant of 350 Rand. The Minister is going to unpack that, and I don't know what other measures this afternoon. What would you as Cosatu would like to hear Lindiwe Zulu say this afternoon?
Well, we've already welcomed the reintroduction of the unemployment grant. And we also have made it very clear that we think that this should be used as the basis or a foundation for the introduction of the basic income grant. And if you look at the period between now and the end of the financial year, the 30th of March, it means that we don't have enough time. We hope that the Minister can share with us the ideas and what is it that government is currently doing with regards to the introduction of the basic income grant officially, because now we have all reached a stage where we agree with each other. At least there's a broad consensus that we do need this to be a permanent intervention, that we cannot afford to have these periodical interruptions. So we would really like to hear what is it that social development is planning to do in terms of consulting and engaging with other social partners, but also the detail of really this reintroduction of the unemployment grant. Because if you remember, there were people who were actually never accommodated. Starting last year, there were people who were rejected when they applied. So we need clarity as to what does that mean going forward, because some people never really got clarification as to why they were rejected or the applications were never successful. So we need the Minister to clarify as to who qualifies and how is the process going to proceed going forward until the end of the financial year, but also how do we then take the process forward now to ensure that this is a permanent social safety intervention.
Okay, we'll talk about that permanence that you're suggesting, because many people have been calling for quite some time now for a universal basic income grant, and you're seeing this as a foundation. We'll unpack that very briefly shortly, but before that, we've had unprecedented violence, looting, and damage to property and infrastructure, and in many of those areas, including post offices, were attacked, and SASSA grant beneficiaries would normally go and queue there to those facilities. Would you expect to hear from the Minister how government is hoping, maybe working with the private sector, to facilitate the payouts?
Definitely, yes, because the people who are going to be affected really are the people who are in desperate need of this intervention. So it is sad that when we have these kinds of protests or riots, people ban the community infrastructure that is so important and so necessary. So yes, indeed, we hope that government has had a conversation around that issue. But long before these riots, actually, you would have noted that up to 50-something post offices were shut down because of the austerity measures, because the post office itself has been struggling with funding. So that issue also needs to be clarified, because the CPS debacle a couple of years ago really was a disaster for the 18 million people who are on welfare. And now you are adding more people, yet you are not really building the capacity of that institution to be able to deliver on this mandate. So the issue of the austerity measures is also a conversation that we need to have with regards to the capacity of the post office to be able to deliver on this mandate. The issue of public-private partnerships, yeah, it's always an option, but there are dynamics when it comes to that too. As the CPS experience has taught us, to say sometimes when you give the private sector the warm embrace, the private sector is hardly ever charitable. So when they come in, you actually end up having to spend more and paying the private sector, because the private sector hardly ever volunteers.
Okay, so we'll have to wait and see what the minister says. Finally, Mr. Pamla, if you may, and very briefly, just your thought as Cosatu. I've read a number of articles and listened to a lot of commentary around the universal basic income grant. You said earlier you are hoping this will be a foundation for some permanent solution going forward in terms of such social grant. Universal basic income grant, many people saying will help a lot, and we've seen how much the extra 350 rand has been able to help. What is the level, and how would you, very briefly, as Cosatu, see a universal basic income grant coming into being, and at what level?
Well, it's very difficult to really start talking about figures, because all of this has to be costed. Right now, the figures that we have seen is that the 350 cost something like between 24 and 27 billion. And like I said, there are people who have not been accommodated here. We still need to have a conversation. As Cosatu, we have said that let us have a conversation as to what constitutes a basic living grant, with the basket of goods that we were talking about when we were discussing VAT, in terms of what are vegetable and non-vegetable goods. Let us go back to that conversation and find out, to say, where is that basket of goods located now, and how much does it cost? And then work around what is feasible and what is possible. Because firstly, we need to make it clear with the basic income grant is that it is only an intervention to ensure that no one is left behind and people don't fall through the cracks. But we should actually be focusing on creating jobs and taking people off the basic income grant so that they can look after themselves and their families. Number two, when we introduce this basic income grant, we should ensure that where we pitch it at is we also think about the sustainability of it all. We don't want to talk about figures that are not going to be sustainable. We need to ensure that, firstly, it looks after the basic needs of the people. It is going to be sustainable going forward. And also that it's only a temporary measure, that we don't say now that we have introduced it, we take resources that could have been better spent actually creating employment and taking people out of social security.
Yeah, there's a lot of detail that will still have to come, but I guess your view is that it must happen, but it would be in the nitty-gritty. The details will have to be clarified and worked out properly. Thank you very much, Sizwe Pamla, speaking on behalf of Trade Union Federation Cosatu. Well, we are hoping, of course, to bring you live that briefing later this afternoon here on eNCA of Minister of Social Development Lindiwe Zulu, as she unpacks what further COVID-19 relief measures will be in place as they reintroduce that much needed 350 rand COVID relief grant.